The story begins at an uncle's house where a niece named Sophia lives. From the morning, his wife, as usual, dissatisfied with something, she started screaming loudly and looking for the girls. On the way, she met one of the helpers and learned that Sophia was still mopping the floor by the stairs. The woman got even more pissed off and went straight to her. As usual, she wanted to give her a few more assignments just so her niece wouldn't have a moment's rest. The lady is very tired, but, to please her aunt, she does not stop and continues to scrub the floor through her strength. Her life in this house is a living hell. Sophia is no longer different from the staff, and sometimes she is forced to do even more. When all of a sudden, she just looked up, and the second someone poured a bucket of cold water on her. Unsurprisingly, that person turned out to be Auntie. Sophia asked what she had done wrong, to which the woman replied that she'd been doing the same thing for too long, even though she should have done it in the morning. The niece started apologizing and explained that she passed out while cleaning, so she couldn't do it any faster. Victoria said she didn't need her excuses and ordered her to handle it within the hour. She doesn't understand how her niece dares to act like this. After all, she let her stay here when Sophia came home in tears after the wedding. In her opinion, as a thank you, she is obliged to do whatever is asked of her, and has no right to complain about anything. The girl is in a desperate situation, because she really can't refuse help after her relatives allowed her to stay in the house. At one point, she suddenly sees her half-sister, who unlike her doesn't look so tired. Angelina couldn't get past it and asked why her sister looked like that. She saw the drenched clothes, the unkempt hair, and dirty face. But instead of helping her, the girl continued to examine her from every angle, and afterward said it was exactly what Sophia deserved after she dishonored their last name. She asked her to stay away and go back to her work, and then, without even saying goodbye, the girl went about her business. She treated her worse than the attendant. Meanwhile, the next day came. Despite the beautiful weather and bright sunshine, being in this house, Sophia has not been happy about anything for a long time now. Even the maids think that Madame Victoria makes her niece do work that she would not make even one of them do. They are well aware that it is impossible for one person to clean all the floors in the house, and they do not hide the fact that they resent the mistress's attitude towards Sophia. And as soon as they started talking about Sophia's divorce, it was like she came out of nowhere and heard those words. Maids became very embarrassed, and they apologized at once and explained that they had meant no wrong. Sophia replied that she was fine and said she just wanted a drink of water. They suggested she draw water from the well because it was the purest and tastiest. When the girl was 15, she was the sole survivor of a fire that killed her parents. After that, she was adopted by her uncle, but he hated her from the beginning. He constantly demanded something in return and ordered me to do chores around the house. Sophia thought she was lucky, but as time went on, she realized she was trapped in a trap. She was forced to agree to live in this man's house, although if she had a choice, she would never have done so. The first day she set foot in his house, the man warned her that as soon as she turned 16, he would throw her out and marry her off. But unfortunately, her first marriage didn't work out. She had to go back, and at this point, she's 25 years old. No one wants a woman of her age, and unfortunately the girl has no connections that would help her move out of here. The only thing left is to be grateful for what her uncle has done for her. No one ever pays attention to whether it's even realistic to do what they're asking her to do. Because of fear, the girl never complained about anything, not even her injured hands, which haven't healed in years. She has plenty of scars from burns, various scrapes and blisters, but if she dares to tell any of them, she'll get twice as much work. It's always been this way. Sophia is used to this life, and despite this, she continues to dream of living on her own. Her relatives never thought about whether they were doing the right thing or not. The only thing that mattered to them was to make a profit. Meanwhile, walking through the woods, Sophia spots a dog. She noticed her right away and wanted to get closer. It was immediately obvious to her that this was a very kind and friendly dog. The girl wasn't afraid and decided to pet him. She hadn't been happy in a long time, and she'd forgotten the last time she'd smiled genuinely. Turns out, and I took him for my daughter because Sophia loves animals. She hadn't seen him in a very long time, but surprisingly, she remembered and recognized him at first sight. The dog, the only one left of her family. Meanwhile, Angelina came to her father for an important conversation and learned that he was going to marry her off to a beast. "The man isn't even hiding it," he said. "It's his final decision that's not even up for discussion. He really wants to marry her off to someone from a certain family, and then do everything in his power to make it happen." At that moment, her mother joined them. She asked her daughter not to worry, because that family had the Earl rank, and for them it was the most important thing. They intend to capitalize through their daughter's wedding. The fact is that the medicine that family owns can bring huge profits to the family trading company. In response, Angelina refused to marry and warned that they could never change her mind or force her to do so. The girl had envisioned her marriage a little differently and never thought about her parents insisting on marrying a beast. As she suddenly had what she thought was a brilliant idea, she looked at her father and hinted that the benefit can be obtained by a slightly different method. Is Angelina hinting about Sophia? The man did not think long, and immediately afterward invited his niece into his office. Without greetings, he informed her that she was to be the bride of the beast instead of Angelina. The family, thanks to which they want to benefit, is a family of white wolves, which everyone is afraid of. They say that they destroy everyone who does not like them, and the head of the family is a man-wolf, who is considered a real villain. The girl immediately realized that her half-sister was probably afraid to marry this man, so she should do it instead of her. Sophia was very frightened, for she had heard of this family and would not want to risk her life for her uncle's company. At this point, the man began to remind her that the girl should be grateful for his help and hinted that she had no right to refuse, for otherwise she risked the street. He did not even listen to her answer and immediately warned her to never tell her future husband about her previous failed marriage after the conversation. She was sent to some place, and most likely the girl will get acquainted with the family. She wasn't explained or told what to prepare for. She was so afraid of upsetting and angering her uncle that she didn't say a single word to him. She had to accept it and not even think about starting to fight back. The only thing she wanted to do was take her dog with her, but unfortunately time was too short. At least that's what her aunt told her. The woman wouldn't even listen to anything about it. Her excuse was that it could be dangerous to take the dog with her. So, she promised to take care of him, and as soon as the girl got married, they would give her the dog. Even in this situation, Sophia was not given any choice. She couldn't insist on anything, much less set any conditions. After a while, she began to miss him very much, and was upset that because of her relatives, she did not have the opportunity to decide for herself, even who to marry. The girl decided that now was not the time to cry, because she needed to prepare to meet her future husband and fulfill her mission. She thought that even if she had to marry the beast, maybe her life would be even better. So she decided she wouldn't get upset ahead of time. There's no telling what's really in store for her. Meanwhile, as soon as she reached the palace, the assistant at once informed his master of He said that Miss Sophia had already arrived, so she should be met in the room prepared for the conversation. Very curious how they will react to each other and how this meeting will play out. A spacious piece of land in the middle of the forest, on which a beautiful mansion stands quietly, is the estate of the beast Jade. The girl didn't think this place would be so huge. This estate is really impressive. His family served the empire for many years as pharmacists and drug makers. Currently the head of the family is the 9th Lord Jade. Sophia is very curious to find out if he really is as scary a man as people say he is. Meanwhile, she was allowed to go into the drawing room, and was asked to wait a little while for The girl is very nervous, for she is afraid of seeing a cruel and frightening beast. She tried to pretend as if she wasn't nervous at all, though in truth, she was beginning to have thoughts of going back in and not risk her life by marrying a real beast. And besides, no one guarantees her that everything will be okay and she has nothing to fear. Her relatives didn't even try to comfort her. They just made her do it and gave her no choice. A little earlier, when she was just getting ready to go on the road, her sister wanted to talk to her, and she came to her room and started asking a lot of questions, like she wasn't the one who suggested the idea to my dad. Although the girl was well aware that Angelina was originally supposed to marry the beast. Instead of supporting and comforting the girl, her sister started talking about how cruel those animals were. Recently, they destroyed someone in the middle of the day for no reason. They say that person was just walking by and didn't even look in their direction. She likes to watch her sister Sophia start to fear her future husband when she calms down, because she's already done enough to ruin her life. Lastly, Angelina said she would hope her sister lived a happy life with her new husband. Though her smile at that moment was too fake, it looked like an ominous anticipation of something bad. Meanwhile, she was finally informed that the Lord would be released soon. He'll be waiting for her in a special room that his assistant will help her get to. After a while, she saw him, and was very much surprised that he met her in the body of a man. It turns out he has very beautiful silver hair, golden eyes, and unusual looks. She's never seen a guy like that before. They met and began to scrutinize each other, for each of them was curious to know and see as much as possible. In fact, Sophia had pictured him quite differently. She had expected to see an aggressive beast that would be scary to talk to. The girl greeted him and said she was very pleased to meet him. Afterward, she introduced herself and said she'd try not to disappoint him. Jade heard this and was very surprised, really wondering what he was thinking right now, and if he liked Sophia. The first few minutes he simply remains silent and scrutinizes her appearance, and then he decided to confess something. All this time he was sure no girl would dare to be his wife. It turns out he's also not exactly thrilled about having to marry a girl he's seeing for the first time in his life, with no feelings and no real love. Sophia hadn't expected to hear him say those words and wondered if perhaps she was worrying for nothing and dreading this meeting so much. This man was much kinder, and it seems like the meeting will be a calm and safe atmosphere. When suddenly the guy started to turn into a real beast, he decided to ask a question. He really wonders if the girl has ever seen a real beast, and realizes what she's agreeing to. Sophia doesn't even know how to react to this, though judging by her reaction, it should all be understandable. The wolf suggested that the girl would probably regret coming here as soon as she saw him like this. He's become a beast that makes you want to run and cry in fear. I don't think he's scaring his future wife on purpose, because otherwise it's hard to explain why he's doing it. She's already afraid to say the wrong thing, and it's like he's making her change her mind and refuse to marry him. In response, Sophia said she'd try to get used to it. After all, it wasn't the appearance that mattered, it was the safety he had to promise about. He didn't like those words. The wolf is sure she's purposely pretending like she's not afraid of him and really wants to be his wife. So, the wolf warned that if she doesn't want to risk it, she better leave right now. A very serious and responsible choice has appeared before her. The girl doesn't know how to act, because maybe it's just a test. Not ruling out the possibility that the wolf was just pretending and wanted to see her reaction, Sophia decided not to give up, and said that she really intended to be his wife. She would not go back, for she must fulfill her uncle's request. The beast at once calmed down and stopped growling. He had heard what he wanted and was ready to give his opinion. He's actually okay with marrying her, but before he does, she has to try to get everyone to recognize her as his fiancée. If she could stay here and last at least a few days. The wolf didn't even doubt it. No one had ever stayed here that long before. Sophia still didn't understand why she needed to force something on someone, but since she did, she'd have to do it. She has no idea what's in store for her next, though it's likely that even living together with a wolf would be much more pleasant than going back to her relatives. Either way, she has no other choice. She either goes home and continues to suffer or stays here and tries to survive. It's not the most pleasant choice, but there's no other option. Meanwhile, when the local maids saw her, they immediately started gossiping and spreading rumors. They've never seen a normal person who can't turn into a beast. At this point, the girl does not even expect a happy life together, because she realizes that the Lord hates people. Like the rest of the staff here, obviously she's gonna have a hard time, but even that's better than going back. For starters, she was helped and sent suitable clothing, had her hair done, and was informed of her duties. Sophia would do anything to be respected and not be told she owed something. She has never been welcomed anywhere, but still, the girl does not intend to give up and continues to believe in a happy future. In the meantime, she went outside and decided to familiarize herself with the estate. She was immediately seen by the maids, and they were surprised that someone had put this uniform on her, because only the staff wore such clothes. The girl replied that she didn't mind helping. Besides, she wasn't used to resting. She did this kind of work every day, and worked without a day off. She had to do the impossible and accomplish in half a day what would normally take several days to accomplish. After that, she started talking about her past, and before she knew it, a lot of time had passed. At that moment, Jade noticed her. He was very surprised that his wife was socializing with the maids. After all, he didn't make her work, much less wear clothes like that. The guy started watching her from afar and studying her character, demeanor, and what kind of person she was. For a moment, he remembered a very faint odor he had smelled during the acquaintance of and he seems to know the scent from somewhere, and he's sure he couldn't mistake it for anything else. He became very curious about what her specialty was and why, unlike other people, he didn't get aggressive or want to do something bad to her. He's getting his behavior under control, though he's never had that before. Meanwhile, the next day came, and like the rest of the staff, the girl woke up first thing in the morning, for she was not accustomed to sleep long. It's hard for her to get used to the fact that no one's making her do anything now. The only thing she has to do is be Jade's wife and do what she likes. But since it's so hard for her to let herself rest or inactivity, she's always wanting to help someone. Meanwhile, it's been 10 days since she arrived and became the Lord's bride. But something has remained the same. She continues to approach the staff and offer her help. In reply, the beasts are surprised and begin to ignore her, for they do not know what to say to it. And whether or not they have the right to accept such an offer from her, they are sure that Sophia is only pretending to help and looking down on them. The girl thinks you can't blame them for having that opinion, because she would probably feel the same way if she were in their shoes. The girl didn't expect to be treated well here, but still, she'd have to do her best to keep the engagement on track. Back in the days when she lived at her uncle's house, when she was very sick and hurting, she always had a dog with her. She was starting to miss him a lot, because right now, he'd be a big help to her. Even just being around him, she begins to lack the support of someone to share her problems with. At that moment, Sophia heard someone's voice. She immediately turned around and saw one of the maids before her, whose clean white garment had fallen to the ground. The girl immediately ran up to her and offered her help, for if anyone saw it, she might be in trouble. Sophia didn't listen to this girl, and decided that no matter what, she had to help her out. She saw that the girl had something wrong with her arm. It really hurt her to lift her clothes. Accordingly, Sophia didn't stand aside. After that, the girl asked if everything was okay because obviously she had something wrong. The maid doesn't even know what to say to that, because she was helped by the gentleman's fiancé, who shouldn't have done it. The girl began to apologize and said it wasn't necessary, as she could have packed those clothes herself. Sophia replied that there was nothing wrong with it anyway. She was happy to help and thought it was fine. The maid isn't used to having someone help her, so she expects and sees it as a trick. It's the first time she's ever had someone do a job for her. The girl hung up all the clothes and after that, asked what more needed to be done. She really wants to help so the maid doesn't have to do it through pain because of her hand. She felt incredibly good. The girl still couldn't believe it wasn't a dream. She is very much afraid that the Lord will find out about it and decide to punish her. Though really, in any case, the bride will explain everything to him anyway. Afterwards, she wet one of the towels and suggested that you put it on your arm, so the pain would be much easier to feel. Sophia asked that if she needed any more help, she would be happy to do so, because he understands how important it is to help people in need, especially in situations like this. She's seen it more than once and been in her shoes. In those moments, she wanted to cry from loneliness and lack of support. Afterward, the maid thanked her again for her help and said that she had not thought it possible to. That's how they met. Sophia has this one person she's on good terms with, when suddenly, they didn't even notice that at that moment, a lord approached them. He appeared very stealthily. The girl was even more frightened than the maid. She went straight to him and was afraid to even say anything. After that, he turned to her and said there was something urgent to talk about. The guy didn't say what, but hinted that it was very important. He asked to follow him and started walking towards his office. He has a very serious expression on his face, which means that the Lord is not happy about something. Meanwhile, they've arrived at his office and it seems the fun part is starting. He's made her very nervous, and afterwards, asked what she was trying to win the favor of the maids by helping them and doing other people's work for. He expected her to behave differently and was sure that the girl would be afraid to leave even her room. But she's always doing something, and she doesn't stand still. She talks to everyone and tries to create good relationships with people. Instead of answering his question, the girl asked if he really hated people. Without thinking long, he replied and said it was true. He never hid it, and he would never change his mind. Sophia hadn't expected such a reaction, and noticed that when he got nervous, he immediately turned into a wolf. She wondered if he was in control of himself at times like this, and as soon as she thought about it, Jade decided to explain. They beasts have been discriminated against by humans for a very long time now. Therefore, he did not and cannot have a good attitude towards them, especially if they do not hide their bad attitude. At that moment, she remembered some who had recently refused her help and thought she looked down on them. The girl immediately realized what was wrong and decided that it needed to be fixed, because many people make mistakes and misunderstand her. For instance, when that maid refused to help, it was only because the girl suspected the mistress of checking and did not believe in the sincerity of her help. She told her husband that in time, she would try to prove that it wasn't true, and they were all very wrong. Jade didn't answer a single word. He started to go silent, which meant the girl had succeeded in getting him interested. It's really very hard for him to believe that one of the people they used to think of as their enemies is trying to convince that she has no bad intentions. Afterward, he remembered that he had not so spoken. The Lord recalled that earlier, she had wanted to be his wife, so explained that becoming a beast's wife meant more than just existing on the estate. She would have to live among the beasts and accompany her husband to social events. And the most important thing she has to accept is that, unlike humans, animals have periods of intense and uncontrollable aggression, which means that if a girl sees her husband being overly aggressive, she has only two options: hide or try to calm him down. Since the second option doesn't offer any guarantee of safety, the guy's hinting that he'd rather not be pissed off. When he's out of control, he won't care who's in front of him. If a girl wants to become his wife, she must make sure that even in such moments, he will never allow himself to be bad towards her. But it's going to take some effort. It could take years or even decades, depending on her desire and fear of going back to a home where her life will be and has been many times worse. Sophia vividly remembered those moments when she felt superfluous and wished she could escape. As suddenly, remembering all these moments, the girl began to cough violently, as if short of breath. She started choking and she doesn't know what's going on, she's panicking. But as soon as Jade was startled and asked what was happening to her, the girl stopped coughing the second she did, and said everything's fine, when really, she doesn't know what's going on. At one point, out of habit from the past, she thought the guy would react badly and punish her. She asked him not to hit her, which seemed very strange because he hadn't really thought about it. After that, he felt so sorry for her that he came even closer and tried to hug her. She felt incredibly pleased, but at the same time, very unaccustomed. She had forgotten the last time someone had felt sorry for her and tried to support her. Jade asked her to calm down, take a deep and small breath. He said it should help. The degree of surprise of the girl at this moment simply cannot be conveyed in words. It was as if she was transported to childhood, where instead of him was her mother. Sophia couldn't help herself and started crying. At the same time, she felt very embarrassed, because when she did this at her uncle's house, she was very much punished and forbidden to show weakness. The girl never thought animals could be so good. He treated her much better than the people she lived with. A much kinder guy, and with him around, she felt protected for the first time. Sophia doesn't even know how to comment on it. She started to keep quiet and enjoy this moment, when suddenly, she thanked him for his support, and in that moment, the guy seemed to change. He stopped hugging her, like he got emotional and did something that was embarrassing. He stepped back some distance, looked at her with surprised eyes, and pretended as if nothing had happened. It turns out he attributed his behavior to the fact that he might have frightened her with the hug. Though in fact the girl was very pleased. She didn't mind at all, and wasn't frightened at all. Jade started to leave to go about his business, and didn't even say goodbye. He was starting to act too weird. If he was so embarrassed about his breeding, he's probably not used to behaving this way because he usually has the image of a dangerous beast. Most likely he just didn't want to spoil his reputation, even though it's improved. First marriage and girl, the decision was made right after her uncle took her into his home, and her ex-husband was the only son of a kimono salesman. He was a cheerful worker, and such a wonderful husband that everyone around her envied him. But at home he was a completely different person. No one believed it when the girl told how unbearable it was to live with him. The worst husband. Impossible to exist with in peace. It was him. He had none of the good qualities when he was at home. And each time, after conflicts and his terrible behavior, he tried to apologize. Each time, it was harder and harder to forgive him. She kept thinking about leaving him and not putting up with this unbearable life together. Even now that she lives here and is about to become the bride of the beast, she is much calmer and more comfortable with even the beast recently hugged her and tried to support her. It's impossible to believe, but that's the reality. Meanwhile, the girl remembers the very moment she felt like she'd never felt before. She felt for the first time close to a real man who would never ignore her tears, and was always ready to help her. Each time she starts to think that maybe he's not as bad as she thought he was. Even in the form of a beast, he is not so dangerous as her first husband. Is it not, after such an experience, that she is no longer afraid of anything, and the next will be better than the last? As usual, the girl started helping the maids, and as soon as she did something, they immediately started discussing it, saying that no matter how hard she tried, they could never trust her anyway. No matter how good she is, she'll never be able to get back and fix the reputations of the people who ruined her forever. They're sure that it's just not possible to waste their time and energy that could be spent on something more enjoyable. Of course, Sophia can hear all this talking, but at the same time she doesn't even think about stopping. She's constantly being watched by one of the maids she helped recently. The girl looks at her a lot and tries to stay as close as possible. In the meantime, Sophia had come up with a clear plan and decided that no matter what anyone said about her, she would do whatever it took to get people to trust her. Instead of waking up at a convenient time, the girl goes out very early and starts doing work instead of the staff. She purposely does it early so they have less to do. They are of course very pleased, but even so, their opinion doesn't change. They're grateful for her help, but they continue to question her good intentions. To them, her endeavors look like a trap or something to be tested, though it is not at all so. Are they really not planning on giving her even one chance, since she's done nothing wrong in all this time? On the contrary, instead of enjoying a fancy life and thinking about herself, she does half their work and doesn't even get a word of thanks. As soon as Sophia is alone, she wants to cry a lot, because no one notices her efforts. She tries to be good, but no one appreciates it. Even Jade tried to support her, and the staff keeps looking for a catch and not believing her. At some point, she just doesn't have any energy and motivation left to keep trying and befriend each of them. The girl just doesn't see results. Meanwhile, walking down the corridor, the Lord meets one of his assistants. He remembered her immediately and asked her to listen to him for a few minutes. The guy looked at her like he was going to punish her for something. The maid is frightened, for she knows that if the master is angry, it can turn into something terrible. It turns out the girl is very much mistaken. In fact, that's not what Jade wanted to talk about at all. He was just looking for his fiancée and wanted to ask if she had seen her or not. To which the girl replied that she did not even know how to answer the question, for lately she had noticed something strange in her behavior. The guy asked if she got bored so quickly and left because he thought there was no other reason. The maid said that because of too much work she was doing in their place, Sophia fainted with a high fever. When she went into her room to ask something, no one answered. The maid peeped in and saw that the mistress was unconscious. She is now resting in her room in the annex. She's much better now. But still, something needs to be done about it. Jade was once again convinced that humans are very weak compared to beasts. They can't stand the lightest of loads that beasts don't even count as loads. Once upon a time, when the wolf had to live among humans, he was constantly insulted and tried to ruin his life. They considered themselves stronger and more influential, and also always looking down upon the beasts just because they're majority of the... He always thought there was nothing good about dealing with people. But once a girl came into his life, she was the only person he felt comfortable with. She's really special. Sophia wasn't afraid to come here to the estate to be his wife. She is not afraid to show her weakness, and is constantly trying to create good relationships with everyone. Jade is very confused. He no longer knows if he should trust this man at all, or if it is better to trust his heart. When he starts to think about it, it gets even more complicated. There's a lot of doubt and at the same time, a desire to get to know her better. But so far, he hasn't found a single flaw in her. A girl trying to be comfortable for everyone, risking her health, as she is used to living without rest in her uncle's house. Here it is very difficult for her to stop thinking about work, but no one knows that yet. If the beasts only knew why she was acting this way, they would never question her. The girl is used to the fact that if she doesn't help or refuses to do something and can be punished, so she joined the maids at once, and was afraid to do nothing, and all because of a terrible habit of pleasing those whom she dreaded after a hard day's work. She very often recalls her half-sister, who liked very much to see her suffering face. It made her feel better and made her happy. Amazingly, Sophia had the patience to stay in that house and not complain about anything. She turned a blind eye to her horrible behavior, lack of rest and constant health problems. When her sister refused something or wanted to choose something better, all the worst and hardest work went to Sophia. She only had to do it because they let her live with them. These people treated her worse than anyone else. She missed her parents very much and didn't know how long she would have to endure this torment. Meanwhile, the next day came. For the first time in her life, she was able to sleep and rest longer than usual. Opening her eyes, she saw Jade in front of her. He touched her face to check her temperature but accidentally woke her up. I can't believe it. But he actually came to see her first thing in the morning because he was worried about her being all right. The guy wants to talk to her. She realizes it's not the best time to do it. She needs to rest. In his presence, Sophia couldn't relax, and for some reason began to feel guilty. The girl immediately got up from the bed and started apologizing. The guy asked her to calm down and told her that getting up wasn't necessary. All he needs to do is check the temperature and make sure it's not too high. But unfortunately, the temperature is rising like this. Sophia gets very hot and can't stand being in a room with no air. She tries to be patient and not give any sign that anything is wrong. Meanwhile, the guy brought some kind of box into the room that's supposed to help lower the temperature. She has a lot of remedies that can deal with any symptom, which is exactly what her uncle wants to get his hands on. They are famous all over the world, but the only disadvantage is that they are too expensive, and also, you can't buy them in a regular store. But since it was a situation like this, Jade opened that box and picked out what he thought was the most appropriate medication. Sophia did not hesitate, because she knows it is absolutely safe. The guy knows very well what he is doing and understands the composition of each remedy. He asked her to take just one pill and promised that in a few minutes, she would forget about the fever and discomfort. In that moment, she felt like a special person, because this is an incredibly valuable drug that is only made here. The animals don't tell anyone the recipe. They pass it on to their children and have done so for thousands of years. At this point, the girl thanked him for his help and apologized for causing him trouble and taking up his precious time. He didn't say anything and just kept watching her. After a few minutes, the girl fell asleep. She is much better. Her fever has gone down considerably, and in general her condition is no longer as unbearable as it was before. The medicine worked in a matter of seconds. The Lord didn't even doubt it. He knew what he was doing and was confident in the effectiveness of the medicine. Afterward, he would not go away and stayed with her in the room, the lad feeling that he ought to be near her. At one point, he'd seen her thin wrists quite by accident, and realized that she'd probably been able to be restricted in her diet in the past. When he hugged her earlier, immediately noticed the suspicious thinness so far. That's the only thing that's bothering him. Then, Jade decided to leave her alone, at which time, it would be much more proper to do something else, such as her further enjoyment of the... It is possible that her poor health and loss of consciousness are due to her poor nutrition, or rather, lack of it for a long time. At one point, Sophia unknowingly started crying and didn't notice her asking him to stay behind. The Lord was very surprised, so he couldn't ignore her words. Of course he stayed. He walked over to her and decided to stay close to her. The first day he saw her and found out what kind of family she was from, he was sure this lady would be spoiled and wouldn't appreciate anything. He had suspicions this girl had just had a fight with her parents, so she decided to get revenge, scare them into marrying him. He thought anything but that she was forced to do it. The guy doesn't understand what kind of father or relative would force a girl to do it for his own gain. The lad remembered his conversation with one of the maids. She told him that their workload was lessened by the fact that the lady did the cleaning and laundry without rest every day. But even though she tries, everyone keeps ignoring it and not noticing it. At that moment, he remembered his thoughts during the first meeting. He also wanted to kick her out and tried to ignore her. But the girl withstood it all. She's just used to this attitude and sees it as something normal. There was nothing unusual in it for her. She was treated 10 times worse than any beast of the... For the first time he felt ashamed of his behavior and wanted to apologize to the man. He began to blame himself for treating her horribly for no reason. For the girl had come with good intentions and all this time, not even resting. Jade doesn't understand how she can still be such a wonderful person after all the way she's been treated. At some point, he wanted to change her life beyond recognition and make Sophia happy, because she deserves it. It's impossible to believe, but she's really used to change even for starting to cry after being mistreated. Meanwhile, the next day came. The weather outside was still the same, beautiful, and the bird song made the morning even more pleasant. Sophia woke up, opened her eyes, and for the first time felt how well rested her body felt. It had been a very long time since she had felt this way. Never thought such a thing possible. She remembered her yesterday morning and noticed the incredible difference. It was probably thanks to the medicine Lord Jade had given her. She felt it was the best sleep she'd had in a while. She didn't have a nightmare or something terrible for the first time. Her back and headache stopped. There is no fatigue and no desire to go back to bed, no matter how it looks from the outside. But she is genuinely happy to get a good night's sleep and not feel tired. As usual, the first thing Sophia did was to get to work. She started tidying up her room. As suddenly, she felt someone's presence. She became very uncomfortable and curious to see who was behind the door. And of course, no one doubted that there was a lord behind the door. He was just waiting and didn't want to enter the room so as not to disturb or interfere with the rest of the room. She wondered very much how long he'd been standing there. She had a renewed sense of guilt that wasn't going anywhere. She began to think how to explain her behavior, for he was against her resting and forgetting about work. The guy looked at her with that look to remind her of his request. Apparently for that very purpose, he started following her. The girl can't do without work, and even after everything that has happened to her, it is very difficult for her to allow herself to rest and do nothing. She started doing things that no one asked her to do. The Lord began to expect an explanation from her. But in response, the girl was afraid to say anything. She became very embarrassed. She hasn't kept her promise and is at risk of being constantly monitored by him. At this point, she started apologizing as usual. The girl was afraid to look him in the eye and promised that it would never happen again. To which the guy replied that he should apologize because he didn't supervise her and didn't forbid her to work. He said she didn't need to apologize for that at all. He was unhappy that the girl was ignoring his request. So as not to waste time on this conversation, he asked the most important thing, how she was feeling. Sophia didn't answer right away, for she was surprised he didn't chastise her or even yell, the Lord more concerned about her well-being than anything else. She said it gave her a good night's sleep and she didn't even notice her symptoms disappearing. The girl had never thought that such marvelous medicines existed in this world. It seemed to her that there was not a single disease they could not cope with. She thanked him and said that if it wasn't for his help, she definitely wouldn't have made it. Jade said that she didn't have to thank him for that, since he hadn't done anything special. He hinted that the girl had started apologizing too often, and he was starting to dislike it and even get a little aggressive. After that, the guy changed the subject and said it looked like she was going to help some of the maids again. So asked her not to do it. He said it was an order and next time his reaction wouldn't be so calm. He's not used to being ignored and trying to do the opposite, so his words are worth listening to. Afterwards, the Lord hinted that he had a very important conversation, which could no longer be postponed, and kept silent. Sophia lowered her gaze and thought it was something bad. She began to remember her actions that he might not like. She's sure the conversation won't be very pleasant, because for that, he even offered to go outside so no one could hear them. She started walking behind him and imagining different options of what he wanted to talk to her about. Something terrible appears in her thoughts, as if there is nothing good he can say to her. She doubts herself too much, and is afraid of those around her, when suddenly, without explaining anything, the Lord turned into a wolf. He looked at her with a look as if he had led her into a trap. The emotions that the girl felt at this moment, just impossible to convey in words. She is very frightened, but realizes that to run away from him will definitely not be possible. Afterward, he requested that the lady should not avert her gaze and look only at him, and after that, asked a question, how scared she is of a beast like him. Except that being alone in the woods with him, there's no easy answer. If he'd asked that question in that room, she wouldn't have been so nervous and would have been able to answer. And yet Sophia replied that she wasn't afraid of animals. I felt quite comfortable. She tried to look as calm as possible, and not give the appearance of wanting to turn back the clock and not agree to go with him to this place. At this point, he knew perfectly well it wasn't true. so he asked to answer the question again. The girl replied that of course she had been very afraid of him at first. But then when he began to take care of her, in spite of his hatred of people, her opinion changed. If she didn't know he was actually a real wolf, she never would have thought or believed it could happen. He was very gentle, caring, and calm. Even ordinary people rarely cared for her the way he did. So she's sure she has nothing to fear, much less feel in danger around him. The wolf hadn't expected such an answer, and this time, for some reason, he was even angrier. As suddenly, the wolf got very nervous and said that he would never trust people. They never say what they really think. In that case, Sophia has no idea how to change his mind. Though it's possible he's just trying to intimidate her on purpose, and really just wants to see her reaction. It could be a routine check or something like that. After that, he kept talking, and the girl became even more afraid of him. She was afraid to look him in the eye, for she didn't know what to expect from this wolf. At this point, he started with the most important thing they had come to this place for. He asked to explain why her scent seemed very familiar to him. The wolf doesn't remember them knowing each other or ever seeing each other, but for some reason, he can't stop thinking about it to this day. Every time he gets very close to her, smells an odor that doesn't give him peace of mind. And that's not all. Next to her, he feels a particular energy that feels very nice and special to him. I wonder if the girl knows what she's talking about because they've never really met before. It's possible that he's only treating her so well because her energy and scent seem so familiar. After that, Jade asked one last question and asked him to answer it as honestly as possible, namely, whether he could trust her and whether she had bad intentions. Instead of answering that question immediately, as usual, she started thinking about something and looking at him with surprised eyes. It turns out the girl is remembering her past, in which neither she nor she ever trusted the mob. Her uncle took advantage of her situation for his own benefit and never hid it, so trust was out of the question. After living like this, it's hard to start trusting people and answering questions like that. Sophia lowered her gaze again and asked to be given at least a few minutes to answer normally. Of course she has no bad intentions, and there's no point in deceiving him, but in this situation, her silence might seem too suspicious. But unfortunately, due to stress and her past hard life, she can't do it any other way, so she needs to think carefully before she promises anything. Finally, the moment had come when she'd made up her mind and figured out what to say to that. As a friend, the girl decided to reveal her only secret, which her uncle had ordered her not to tell anyone. She told about her past marriage. Sophia doesn't know yet whether she will regret it or not. But in any case, if she wants to gain his trust, she must confess it to him, in her opinion. It would be wrong to hide this information from the man with whom she plans to live the rest of her life with. He should know absolutely everything about her, even if it's not very pleasant. Plus, she's very curious to know why her uncle is so against anyone knowing this information, since there's nothing wrong with it. The girl never understood what was wrong with people not being right for each other and deciding to break up. She began to recall the times when her ex-husband initiated the divorce. He said it with a smile, as if he had been waiting and had wanted to do it for a long time. It's impossible to convey the feelings the girl felt at that moment. It was one of the worst days of her life. She's sorry she married a man she didn't know or even know what he was planning. He took away everything she had, and after the divorce, she had no choice but to turn to her uncle for help, which was the second biggest mistake of her life, after marrying her ex-husband. Surprisingly, the wolf reacted quite calmly. He didn't start getting nervous and accusing her of having a relationship before that. Sophia had expected a completely different reaction, but as soon as he said there was no problem, she was much relieved. Jade understood why she had been so nervous all this time and was afraid to admit it. He explained that he would never blame her for it. After all, everyone had their mistakes in a situation like that. He tried to reassure her, and reminded her that not all people she tells the truth to will react the same way he did. In the moment, he seriously considered that it is really, after such a past, very difficult to stop depending on me around me and start living for my own pleasure, much less deny me something. Afterward, Jade assumed that the girl was here instead of her half-sister. It's obvious to him that it was most likely Angelina who did everything she could to keep herself safe and get her sister to marry the beast instead of her. He felt sorry for the girl, imagining how much she'd had to endure, and what it was like to have other people do everything in her place. In that case, he again decided to reassure her and confess that even her previous marriage would have no effect on his attitude towards her. Since she is already his bride, the wolf promised that from now on, her life will start to change for the better. He sincerely wants her to be happy and forget about her past. Sophia couldn't believe her ears. From the very first day she came here, she had been afraid to tell this secret. She was afraid of ruining not only the wolf, but her uncle as well. But now, she had no other choice and had to be as honest as possible. It's the only way she can gain his trust and have no doubt that she has nothing more to hide, now that she has no secrets. At some point, the girl couldn't help herself and cried. She was very pleased to hear such words, and to realize that it is possible not to be afraid of anything. If, on the day she was about to move out of her uncle's house, someone had told her that the wolf would turn out to be very kind, she would never have believed it. In fact, he was even better than the people she lived with. She had yet to meet anyone who treated her as well as Jade did. With each passing day, she stops being afraid of him and begins to enjoy her new life. The girl does not even doubt that he sincerely wants to help her. It turns out that next to him, her biggest dream came true. She became happy and stopped being afraid of others. Now she doesn't owe anyone anything, and the only thing she has to do is enjoy life and do only what makes her happy. Not long ago, she felt superfluous and tried to please evil relatives just for sleeping in their house. She didn't do anything other than cleaning. Sophia was single-handedly doing a job that usually takes the entire staff a few days to do. No attention was paid to her even when she complained of her ill health. Even wounds or loss of consciousness guaranteed her even a few hours of rest. It was a living hell that she'll never get over. No matter how hard she tries, it's no wonder that once she gets to the Lord and feels supported, she can't control her tears and wants to be thankful for it all the time. Even ordinary respect from others seems new to her. She's just used to earning even food, let alone respect. Meanwhile, the wolf took her hand and told her that he understood her perfectly. But anyway, she would have to get used to the new reality that all normal people lived in. Because good treatment of each other or food is no longer something to be earned, it's the norm, the air, or whatever. There's no luxury in that. As it turned out to her initially, she was just used to bad things and thought she wasn't worthy of something better. It seems like from this day forward, her life is really going to start to change, especially since she deserves it more than anyone else. When she met the wolf, she never dreamed that he would turn out to be a wonderful man to marry. At this point, she was even beginning to be grateful to her uncle, because if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have met this guy. Meanwhile, in that house, as usual, it's never quiet. Angelina has started to receive a lot of marriage proposals, and each time, it makes her angrier and angrier. The girl doesn't want to get married and has asked many times not to have these letters brought to her. She still doesn't even open them. Over the years, she has constantly received such offers and constantly declined. The girl has not gone on a single date. She's just not interested, but at the same time her parents keep insisting that she meet someone and stop saying no. But Angelina knows exactly why they're doing this. Her parents are trying to capitalize on it as usual. They're looking for the most promising groom for her. At some point, the girl remembered her sister and wondered how she was doing and if she'd even survived. But she doesn't even realize that she's doing much better with the beast than she has all these years with them. Surprisingly, after a girl gives up on dating, she continues to dream of a relationship she can brag about later on. Hours later, the assistant came to her again and informed her that she had received another letter. The woman was afraid to even enter her room. Her hands began to tremble, and she was afraid to even look her mistress in the eyes. Angelina started yelling at her again and ordered her from now on to throw all those letters in the trash can so she wouldn't even see them. How suddenly, afterward, she became interested in reading one of them for the first time, and she took the letter from the assistant and began to read This letter was sent by a boring man she met at a recent banquet. He's very rich, but she didn't like his looks. At the same second, the girl threw the letter on the floor and said that she was not interested. She was once again convinced that there was no point in responding to these proposals. It's very strange that she wants to get married, but refuses to go out with hundreds of men who want to meet her. At some point, she noticed that she was too bored to have a sister around. She loved watching her and seeing a scared face in any situation, but since there was no such thing now, she had nothing else to do. Turns out all she did was watch her sister and boost her self-esteem. At this point, She went outside to have some fun, and not to think about bad things. The girl met a dog, who was clearly not happy to see her. She was frightened of him and out of control. The girl never liked dogs, and it shows very well. The dog sensed what kind of person she was, so he reacted very aggressively. After that, she started screaming very loudly and called her mother for help. Angelina's not used to solving her problems on her own, because it was always her mother who did it for her. She said that she was very scared, and she didn't want this dog in the garden. The girl was worried about getting rid of it, or at least giving it to someone else. The woman laughed and said that it was not necessary, because it was possible to create a separate room for him where no one would enter. In her opinion, it was the most suitable option. But the girl is not satisfied with this option. She wants to get rid of this dog, because the dog is good only to his mistress. She doesn't want to put up with it. So she went to her father. She still has hope that he'll understand and help her get rid of the dog. But he immediately refused and said it was wrong. They hadn't promised the girl that he would be okay, so they couldn't fulfill Angelina's wish. But the girl decided not to give up. She insisted that she could think of a way to outsmart her sister, because most likely she would either not survive or stay there forever and forget about her dog. The man couldn't stand it and explained that his decision was not up for debate. He wasn't going to repeat the same thing 10 times over. He asked her to get out of that office and not to ask any more questions like that, because next time he wouldn't even listen to her. Angelina realized that she will not succeed, so began to come up with her own plan. She does not plan to stop and continues to take revenge on her sister. Her parents did not support her for the first time and denied her something. The girl has never been in such a situation and does not understand why this happens. Meanwhile, the next day has arrived. Unlike her sister, Sophia is happy and continues to enjoy her new life. She woke up early in the morning, looked in the mirror, and thanked everyone who had influenced her destiny. She had gotten to the place she had dreamed of. She did all the perfect husband stuff and completely forgot that very first day. She was afraid of him and wanted to go back. Sophia regretted that when she was asked to marry a beast, she didn't want to do it, and was angry at her sister. Though if it wasn't for her, she would have never gotten here. Now she feels like the luckiest girl in the world. She's grateful to her fate that even after hell at her uncle's house, she met this guy. Sophia is trying to get used to her new life, and every day it gets easier and easier for her to get used to it. She is treated much better by the staff, everyone around her, and even her future husband. They saw her as someone they could trust, who doesn't have bad intentions or anything like they originally thought, so her life is slowly but slowly starting to change. Even the maid who was initially nice to her has become even nicer to her. A little more and they'll be best friends. Meanwhile, they met and began to discuss the recent events. The maid told how the girl had fainted and how the gentleman was greatly worried about her. He was genuinely concerned and wanted to help. In fact, even those who treated her badly wanted to help and felt guilty. They admitted for the first time that they were very grateful for her help. The girl admitted that in fact, she was eating very poorly, and all because of the lack of food intake, in which she was restricted by relatives with whom she lived before. Maid could never have thought that the girl had suffered so much before and been in such dreadful conditions. She has not even words to describe her surprise. For even here, as a maid, her life is much better than that of a girl in her uncle's house. She began to feel sorry for her and promised that she wouldn't tell anyone about it, because I'm sure the girl wouldn't want anyone else to know about it either. They started talking about it like real friends who don't hide anything from each other and can talk about anything. They really support each other and try to help each other. They don't see each other as a maid or a mistress. They make time for it on purpose and talk about their problems that before they had no one to share with. Even the Lord didn't mind you girls socializing. Once again, it proves that even a wolf can be kinder than some people, like her uncle. The girl doesn't even know a man who could be meaner, rougher, more cruel than he is. Sophia wishes she had never seen him again, and soon forget that he even exists. Hearing these words, the racing one reacts every time, as if it was the first time she heard it. She puts herself in her shoes, and doesn't realize how unbearable it was,